My family made me babysit every holiday because I don't have kids, so it doesn't matter. I missed every dinner, every memory, just so they could relax. But when I lost someone I loved, none of them showed up. That's when I realized I was just their convenience, never family. A new story begins right now. Make sure you've liked, shared, and subscribed so you never miss a moment. I never noticed how quiet the house became after the laughter stopped. It used to echo, plates clinking, kids running through the hallway, my mother's voice from the kitchen calling someone to set the table. Those sounds used to mean something. They used to mean home. But over the years, they became the background noise of other people's memories. Memories I wasn't part of. The first time I realized I was the babysitter and not the guest of honor, I was 23. My sister Claire had just had her first kid, and she looked exhausted in that saintly way people describe new mothers, pale but glowing, drowning in sleeplessness, yet somehow radiant. She asked me if I could just watch Ethan for a few hours, while she and her husband took a nap upstairs before dinner. A few hours turned into the whole night. Dinner came and went, laughter, music, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles, all of it faint from the baby's room where I sat, rocking Ethan until my arm went numb. I remember hearing my brother's voice through the floorboards, telling some story that made everyone laugh so hard the chandelier rattled. I smiled to myself, thinking I'd be down there soon. But when the baby finally fell asleep and I crept downstairs, the dining room lights were off. The plates were empty. That was the first time I missed the meal. They said I was so good with kids that I had the touch. I didn't know then that the touch was code for the one who gets stuck with it. Every holiday after that, it became expected. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve, all the same story. You don't have kids, you don't understand how hard it is, they'd say. And I didn't argue. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I just thought helping made me useful. But usefulness becomes a cage when no one sees you through it. The house always smelled like cinnamon and pine this time of year, and I used to love it. Now it just smells like the hours I lost. You start to measure time differently when you're the one in the background. By the sound of distant laughter, by how many times the baby monitor blinks red, by how many thank yous sound like pity. My family wasn't cruel. That's what made it worse. They were kind in the way people are kind when they think they're doing you a favor. I was so good to them. They told their friends I was a saint. But saints don't get invited to the table. They just light the candles for everyone else. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, it's small moments you ignore until they start to echo too loud to silence. There was the year my brother, Paul, brought his new girlfriend. Some corporate type with two bright teeth and a voice that could slice glass. She looked around the house like it was a stage she'd been waiting to perform on. I remember her patting my shoulder when she found me in the living room with the twins, saying, "You're so sweet for doing this. I could never give up my evening like that." She laughed, and I smiled, but something inside me cracked because I didn't give it up. It was taken. I told myself next year would be different, that I'd say no, that I'd come as a guest, not the help. But when the holidays rolled around again, the same conversation played out, word for word, like a script written long ago. "Could you just keep an eye on them for a bit, hun? You know how wild they get. Just until dinner. Just for an hour." But an hour is never an hour in that house. Sometimes I'd sneak glances at the dining room from the hallway, through the cracked door, the light spilling over the carpet, the clinking glasses, the way everyone leaned in, faces glowing, the rise and fall of conversation like waves I wasn't allowed to swim in. And I'd wonder if they noticed the empty chair, if they even remembered I was there. Years went by like that. The same pattern, the same laughter without me. Then, one winter, I got a call that shattered everything else I thought I knew about loss. Her name was Lucy. She wasn't family by blood, more like a quiet constant in my life. We'd met at work, and she had this way of speaking softly but meaning everything she said. She was the one person who never made me feel like an afterthought. We didn't have a grand romance. It wasn't that kind of love. She was just there. And then suddenly she wasn't. A drunk driver ran a red light. The police officer who called sounded detached, as if reading from a cue card. I didn't remember what I said back. I think I thanked him. I think I hung up and sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark TV screen until morning. The funeral was small. It rained, of course, because of course it did. I sat alone, my coat soaked through, listening to the priest talk about light and loss, words that dissolved into the sound of water hitting umbrellas. I kept looking around, waiting for someone, anyone from my family to show up. They knew. I had told them. No one came. Later, I found out they'd all gone on a weekend trip together, a family getaway. I saw the photos on social media, smiling faces, matching scarves, the caption, nothing like family time. Something inside me went cold after that. It wasn't anger, not yet, just a kind of emptiness that felt heavier than rage, like standing in a room where the air's too thick to breathe. I stopped going home for a while. They called at first, left voicemails. We miss you. The kids ask about you. But it wasn't me they missed. It was what I did for them. Then one night, Claire showed up at my apartment. I hadn't seen her in almost a year. She looked tired, and her makeup smudged, her hair tied up like she'd come straight from the car without looking in the mirror. Can we talk? She asked, standing in the doorway. I let her in. The air between us felt brittle. She looked around the apartment like she didn't recognize it. You've redecorated. I moved some furniture, I said. My voice sounded foreign to me. She hesitated before sitting down. Listen, I know things have been tense, but it's the holidays again, and everyone would really love to see you. Would they? She blinked. Of course, your family. I laughed. It came out sharper than I meant. Family shows up, Claire. You didn't. Her face softened in that way people do when they think you're being unreasonable. We didn't know what to say. It was so sudden, and the kids— Don't, I interrupted. Don't make this about the kids. The silence that followed felt like static, something humming just beneath the surface. She shifted in her seat, eyes darting to the floor. We were hoping you might help again this year, just for a bit. You're so good with— That was when I laughed again. Not bitter, broken. I stood up, pacing. You came all the way here to ask me to babysit? Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. That was answer enough. I felt something in me close that night. A door, maybe. One that had been open too long. When she left, I didn't follow her to the door. I just listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway until the elevator chimed. And when it did, I whispered to the empty room, not this year. But the thing about people like my family, and they don't believe you when you say no. They hear it as an invitation to push harder. The next week, a package arrived. No note, no return address, just a box filled with toys and wrapping paper. I knew who it was from. It felt like a guilt offering, wrapped in red and gold. I didn't open it. Instead, I started thinking about the house, about all the years I spent in those walls, invisible. And I began to wonder what would happen if they finally saw me. Really saw me. The thought scared me because it wasn't just about being noticed anymore. It was about being remembered. The snow came early that year, thick, heavy flakes that muted everything. The streets looked empty, the world quieter. And as the holiday drew closer, I found myself driving, without really planning to, toward that old house again. The lights were already up when I got there, blinking reds and greens, glowing from every window. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes moving, laughter spilling out every time the door opened. It looked like something out of a movie. I parked across the street, engine idling, and just watched. It had been a long time since I'd seen it like that in Guat. Alive, warm, full of people. And for a moment, I almost turned around. But then I saw the kids, older now, taller, chasing each other through the living room. And in the corner, there it was. The old baby monitor, still on the shelf, still blinking red. I don't know what came over me then. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was the kind of madness that comes from being forgotten for too long. I turned off the engine, stepped out into the snow, and crossed the street. The sound of my boots crunching was the only thing I could hear. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. My reflection stared back from the glass. Older, sharper, unfamiliar. Then the door opened before I could knock. It was Paul. His expression froze when he saw me. Oh, you came. For a heartbeat, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled, the kind of smile people use to smooth over cracks. Come in. It's freezing out there. The warmth hit me as soon as I stepped inside. The smell of pine and cooking, the faint music playing somewhere in the back. Everyone turned to look. For a second, it was like time folded in on itself. Claire rushed over, hugging me too tight. I knew you'd come. I didn't hug her back. She pulled away, laughing nervously. We were just about to sit down. You're just in time. But I knew I wasn't. The table was already full. That's how it always was. Dinner was always the same. The same tablecloth, the same silverware polished until it reflected faces like warped mirrors. The centerpiece was a garland of pine and cranberries, the same one they'd used for years. Even the way the plates were arranged, 2 inches from the edge, napkins folded into triangles, hadn't changed. It was like walking into a memory that refused to grow old. I stood there for a moment, watching everyone bustle around. Claire was arguing with Paul about the gravy, their voices playful but sharp underneath. The kids darted between chairs, the twins giggling as they tried to sneak pieces of bread. My mother hovered near the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, hair pinned up in the same careful way she'd always done it. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt staged, like everyone was performing happiness for an unseen audience. Claire ushered me toward a chair at the far end of the table. Sit, sit. You must be starving. I sat, though the food in front of me looked unreal. Too perfect, too symmetrical. My reflection stared back from the gravy's surface, warped by the flicker of candlelight. Paul raised his glass. To family, he said. Everyone echoed it. To family. I lifted my glass, though I didn't drink. The word tasted like ash on my tongue. Dinner began in the usual chaos. Overlapping conversations, the clink of silverware, the rise and fall of laughter that didn't reach the eyes. Every time someone passed me a dish, they thanked me like I was a guest in their home, not someone who had once known every creak of the floorboards, every hiding spot, every story the walls could tell. I watched them, really watched them. The way they leaned into each other, the way they avoided my gaze when they thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't discomfort, it was guilt. At one point, my mother asked about my job, her tone carefully neutral. Still at that office? Yeah, I said. Still there. Good, she said, smiling too quickly. Stability is important. Paul laughed. You always were the steady one. I smiled, but inside, something twisted. Steady. That was their word for stagnant. The conversation drifted to vacations, renovations, kids' schools, the kind of small talk that fills space but means nothing. I caught snippets that felt like echoes of years past. Remember when she used to babysit? Someone said. Oh, those were the days. Laughter again. My mother's hand brushed mine as she reached for the salt. Her fingers trembled slightly. Everything okay? I asked quietly. She looked at me, eyes glassy, smile frozen. Of course, dear. Everything's perfect. Perfect, that word again. It followed this family like a ghost. After dinner, they moved to the living room. I lingered at the table, watching the empty plates, the half-melted candles, the crumbs that told stories of conversations I wasn't part of. Then Claire called out, Hey, we're opening presents early this year. Come join us. I hesitated. For a moment, I thought about leaving. I could still feel the weight of the car keys in my pocket. I could just walk out, disappear into the snow. But something in me wanted to see this through, to understand what I had missed all those years, what kind of spell I had been under. The living room was warm, almost too warm. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and the glow of the tree lights painted the room in red and gold. The kids tore into their gifts, paper flying like confetti. Their laughter filled the space, and for a moment, it almost felt real again. Then I saw it. A small, unwrapped box under the tree, with my name written in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was light. Too light. Claire noticed. Oh, that's from us, she said quickly, smiling. Just something little. I opened it carefully. Inside was a photo. An old one, framed in glass. It was from one of the early Christmases, back when Ethan was still a baby. The whole family was in it, except me. I had taken the picture. Claire touched my arm. We thought you'd like to have it. You're the one who captured it, after all. I stared at it for a long time. The edges of the photo trembled slightly in my hands. Yeah, I said softly. I remember. The conversation resumed around me, but I barely heard it. The faces in the photo stared back, frozen in a happiness that excluded me. I couldn't tell if the ache I felt was nostalgia or resentment. Maybe both. Hours passed like minutes. The kids went to bed. The adults drifted toward the kitchen for coffee and dessert. I stayed behind in the living room, staring at the fire. The house had quieted again, that deep, heavy silence that only comes after too much noise. I thought about leaving, about slipping out unnoticed like I used to, but before I could move, I heard footsteps behind me. It was my mother. She stood there for a long moment before sitting down beside me. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she'd aged a decade since dinner. I'm glad you came, she said. Are you? She sighed, looking into the fire. Your sister was worried you'd never come back. Maybe I shouldn't have. Silence. The fire popped, sparks rising and fading. I know you felt left out, she said finally. We never meant for that. You have to understand, everyone had kids, responsibilities. And I didn't. Her eyes flicked toward me, regret flickering there. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. The words hung between us, sharp and final. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly. We just thought you didn't mind. You were always so calm, so willing to help. I didn't mind at first, I said. Mind at first. Until I realized no one even noticed when I wasn't there. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. We did notice. Not when it mattered. The fire's glow cast shadows across her face, making her look both older and smaller. Families make mistakes, she whispered. Some mistakes don't feel like mistakes when you keep repeating them. She said nothing after that, just sat there, staring into the flames. After a while, I stood up. I'm leaving. Her head snapped up. Now, but tell them I said goodbye. She looked like she wanted to say more, but the words never came. I turned, walked toward the front door, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The air near the entryway felt colder, sharper. When I reached for my coat, I noticed something strange. A small framed photo on the wall near the stairs. I'd never seen it before. It was the same family portrait from earlier, but this time I was in it. I froze. In the photo, I stood in the background, blurred, almost ghost-like, but there. My eyes were hollow, my smile faint. I didn't remember taking it, didn't remember being part of that scene. And yet, there I was. Mom, I called out, my voice unsteady. When was this taken? No answer. I turned around. The living room was empty. A faint creak came from upstairs. Soft, rhythmic, like footsteps. For a moment, I thought it was the kids. But something about the sound made the hair on my neck stand up. It was too slow, too deliberate. I climbed the stairs, the old wood groaning under my weight. The hallway was dark except for the faint light spilling from under one of the doors, the nursery. The same one I'd spent so many nights in years ago. The air inside was cold. The wallpaper had faded, the mobile above the crib still turning gently, though there was no draft. I took a step closer. The baby monitor blinked red. I picked it up, listening. Static. Then, a faint voice. Stay with them. I froze. The voice was soft, almost familiar, like an echo from another life. You were always so good with them. My heart hammered in my chest. Hello? I whispered. The static deepened, then silence. Behind me, the floor creaked again. I turned, but no one was there. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing hard, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. The house always had a way of playing tricks like that. The wind, the pipes, the way sound traveled through the walls. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something else. A faint outline on the wall above the crib, wall above, where the wallpaper had peeled slightly. It looked like handwriting, faint but visible in the dim light. I leaned closer. The letters were uneven, written in something dark that had seeped into the wall. You promised you'd stay. A chill ran through me so violently I dropped the monitor. It hit the floor, crackling back to life with static. Don't leave again. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and fled the room. The stairs seemed longer than before, the shadows deeper. When I reached the bottom, the lights in the living room flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. My mother stood by the fireplace again, but something about her expression had changed. She looked different, distant. You shouldn't go up there, she said softly. I swallowed hard. What's in that room? She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Memories, best to leave them alone. I didn't respond. I just grabbed my coat, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. The snow had stopped, but the world outside felt just as silent. My breath clouded in front of me as I walked to the car, my footsteps the only sound in the night. When I looked back at the house, the lights in the nursery window were still on. And for just a second, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing there, small, still, watching me leave. I blinked, and it was gone. I drove without direction, the road stretching endlessly ahead. The radio played softly, some old carol that made the night feel heavier. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of the next town in the distance. Even then, the words on that wall followed me. You promised you'd stay. And for the first time in years, I started to wonder what exactly I had left behind in that house, and what still remembered me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the wall came back. Those faint words bleeding through faded wallpaper. You promised you'd stay. I kept seeing them over and over, the way people see headlights after staring too long into traffic. By morning, the snow had crusted into ice along the roads, but I drove anyway. The silence in the car felt too loud. Every so often, I'd glance at the back seat, half expecting to see that flickering baby monitor still blinking red. I'd left it behind, but the static still lived in my head. I tried to work that week. Tried to convince myself it was just stress, grief, nostalgia, whatever word you use when something inside you refuses to sit still. But the world outside felt distant. My coworkers' voices sounded hollow, their laughter like echoes from behind glass. By Thursday, I found myself parked outside my mother's house again, without remembering how I'd gotten there. The driveway was empty, the curtains drawn. It looked smaller than I remembered, the paint beginning to flake around the edges. I told myself I just needed closure, that I'd left things unsaid, that I'd make peace with her and move on. But when I knocked, no one answered. The key was still under the mat. It always had been. The air inside was colder than it should have been. The scent of pine had faded, replaced by something stale, like dust and old smoke. I called out once, softly. Mom? Nothing. The living room looked frozen in time. Presents still piled neatly under the tree, mugs on the coffee table half filled with hardened cocoa. I touched one. It was stone cold. Then I saw the photo, the same one they'd given me, the family portrait without me. It sat on the mantel now, but this time, someone had added a second frame beside it. Inside was a different photo, the same scene, but I was there again, standing in the background, blurred and smiling. I felt a chill crawl down my neck. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The back of the frame wasn't sealed properly, and when I pried it open, an old Polaroid slipped out. It fell face down onto the carpet. When I turned it over, I froze. It wasn't from a holiday, it was from the nursery. In the photo, the crib was empty. The wallpaper behind it looked new, no writing, no age. But what caught my eye was the shadow in the corner. It looked like a person, crouched low, almost invisible in the dim light. Something about the shape made my stomach turn. I shoved the photo back and set it down, trying to steady my breathing. It's nothing, I whispered to myself, just a trick of light. But then I heard it, faint from upstairs, the same creak I'd heard that night. I told myself not to go, that I'd already been down this road. But my body moved before my mind caught up. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound too sharp in the still air. When I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel. The nursery door was half open. This time, I didn't turn on the light. I just stood in the doorway, staring at the faint shape of the crib against the window. The air was heavy, metallic somehow, like a storm waiting to break. I whispered into the dark, "Who are you?" For a moment, nothing. Then, a sound, soft as breath, a whisper that might have been my name. I stumbled back, my shoulder brushing the wall. My fingers caught on something, paper maybe, and I realized there were more markings beneath the peeling wallpaper. I tugged at it, the old paper tearing easily under my hand. Beneath it, more words. Faded, overlapping, written in what looked like pencil. Names, dates, short sentences half erased by time. And there, near the center, one phrase that hadn't faded. She was supposed to stay. I stood there for what felt like forever, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I finally went back downstairs, I found my mother in the kitchen. She startled when she saw me. "You scared me," she said, her hand clutching the counter. "You didn't answer the door." I was in the back. Her voice sounded brittle, the edges fraying. I studied her face, how pale she looked, how her eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "Who wrote on the nursery wall?" I asked quietly. She froze. "What?" "The words, under the wallpaper." For a second, she didn't move. Then she shook her head. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not." Her hand trembled against the counter. "You shouldn't have gone up there." "Why not?" "Because it's not yours to remember." That stopped me cold. "What does that mean?" But she didn't answer. She turned away, fussing with the teapot, though it was empty. "You should go," she said softly. "Please." The word please landed heavier than I expected. It sounded less like a request and more like a warning. I wanted to press her, but something in her expression made me stop. Her eyes, when she finally looked up, were filled with something that looked like fear. So I left. Outside, the sky had darkened, clouds rolling, low and heavy. Snow began to fall again, slow at first, then thick, the kind that swallows sound. By the time I reached the car, the windshield was already covered. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared into the snow. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something. Something that had been right there, hidden in plain sight for years. I went through old boxes, old photos, anything I could find that tied me to that house. Most of it was what you'd expect: school pictures, birthday cards, a handful of letters I'd written to Claire back when we were still close. But then, at the bottom of one box, I found something odd: a hospital bracelet. The paper kind they give newborns. Faded ink, barely legible. A name, Eleanor. My breath caught. There was no Eleanor in our family. I turned it over. On the back, written in my mother's handwriting, she didn't make it. I sat there, staring at the words, trying to make sense of them. Was it someone she'd known? A cousin? But then I remembered the nursery, the one that had always been there, long after all the kids had outgrown it. The one no one ever talked about redecorating. And the phrase on the wall, "She was supposed to stay." A cold realization crept in. The next day, I went back. I told myself I just needed answers, that I'd talk to Claire, that we'd sort through this quietly, rationally. But when I arrived, it was Paul who opened the door. His face went still when he saw me. "You shouldn't keep showing up like this," he said. "I need to talk to Mom." "She's resting. Then I'll wait." He hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. The house felt even emptier than before. The fire was out, the tree lights were off. I sat on the couch, the same spot as always, while Paul paced the kitchen. After a while, he said quietly, "You really shouldn't dig around old things." I found a hospital bracelet, and I said, "Eleanor." His hand froze on the counter. "Who was she?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "You don't remember." "Remember what?" He turned, eyes dark, tired. "You were supposed to be watching her." The room tilted. "What are you talking about?" He swallowed hard. "It was years ago. You were 13. Mom was sick, Dad was working nights. They left you in charge. She was just a baby." I shook my head. "No, that's not true." But the way he looked at me told me it was. He sighed, rubbing his face. "You went to check on her that night. She'd stopped breathing before you even called for help." I felt my knees weaken. The edges of the room blurred. I I don't remember that. Mom told you it was a dream, he said. She didn't want you to carry it. None of us did. I couldn't breathe. The words felt heavy, unreal. Eleanor. He nodded. Your sister. I sank onto the couch, the air thick, unmovable. Suddenly everything clicked. The nursery that was never changed, the writing on the wall, the way my mother's voice shook when she said it's not yours to remember. She was supposed to stay, I whispered. Paul's voice softened. You did what you could. You were a kid. But his words didn't reach me. They just echoed, hollow, around the room. I was there, I murmured. Every holiday, every night, every time someone needed something, I stayed. And suddenly I understood. That was why they never said no when I offered to help. Why they always left me behind with the children. It wasn't just convenience, it was penance. A role they'd written for me and expected me to keep playing forever. The babysitter, the caretaker, the one who stays. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. I need to see her room. Paul didn't stop me this time. Maybe he knew there was no point. Upstairs, the nursery door stood open. The light flickered faintly from the hallway bulb. I stepped inside, every sound of my breathing amplified in the quiet. The crib was still there, the wallpaper still torn, and on the wall, beneath the faded words, I saw something new, something that hadn't been there before. A faint outline, drawn in chalk maybe, shaped like a small handprint. My throat tightened. I pressed my hand against it, and for the first time in years, I remembered. Just a flash, a sound, the weight of silence after crying stopped. I sank to the floor, tears blurring my vision. Not from fear, but from the weight of what I'd been made to forget. Downstairs, I heard my mother's voice, faint but clear. You can let go now. And for the first time, I understood what she meant. I left the house at dawn. The snow had stopped, and the sky was beginning to lighten, a pale blue breaking through the clouds. I didn't look back this time. Driving away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not peace exactly, but something close to it. The past doesn't vanish. The past doesn't. I realized it just waits for you to stop running long enough to remember its name. And sometimes, remembering is the only way to let it rest. I drove for hours after leaving the house, watching the morning light stretch thin across the empty road. Every mile felt like shedding a layer of something I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Still, the memories clung. I could hear them, faint and low, the echoes of voices I hadn't heard in years. My mother calling my name from downstairs, Claire laughing in the kitchen, the soft, rhythmic creak of a rocking chair from a room that should have been silent. By the time I reached the edge of town, the snow had melted into a thin, gray slush. I pulled into a diner that hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Same chipped counter, same smell of burnt coffee and sugar. The waitress recognized me, though she didn't say my name. Just smiled the way small-town people do when they remember who you used to be but can't place what went wrong. I sat by the window, watching cars pass. It was strange. How the world kept going, indifferent to the ghosts we carry. When I finally checked my phone, there were messages from Claire, missed calls too. The most recent one read simply, "Come home, please. Home." That word didn't mean what it used to, but something in the way she'd written it, not come by, not we need to talk, come home, told me this wasn't just guilt. It was something else, something ending. I drove back. The house looked different in daylight. Smaller, softer somehow. The snow around it had started to melt, revealing patches of dead grass and half-buried footprints. For a moment, I stood at the edge of the driveway, wondering if I should turn back. Then I saw Claire standing by the door. She didn't look like she'd slept. Her eyes were swollen, her hair pulled back carelessly. When I stepped closer, she opened the door without a word and led me inside. The house was quiet, and the kind of quiet that has weight. "Mom's not well," she said finally. My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "She's been getting confused lately, forgetting things. The doctor says it's early, but..." Her voice trailed off. "She's been asking for you." I felt the room shift slightly around me. "Why?" "She says she needs to tell you something." Claire's tone was strange, a mixture of fear and relief, as if part of her wanted me to hear it and part of her didn't. We found my mother in the living room. She was sitting in her old armchair by the window, a blanket draped across her knees. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, catching the silver strands in her hair. For a moment, she looked peaceful, almost the way I remembered. When she saw me, her face lit up. "You came back," she whispered. "I did." Claire hovered by the door, uncertain, then slipped out quietly, leaving us alone. My mother's eyes followed her until the door closed. Then she turned back to me. "You remember now, don't you?" I sat down across from her. "Some of it." She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "That's what Paul said." "It's true." Silence stretched between us. The clock ticked faintly on the mantel. Outside, a branch brushed against the window, soft as breath. "I should have told you sooner," she said finally. "But you were so young. You didn't understand what happened. You blamed yourself." I shook my head. "I don't even remember blaming myself." "That's because we made sure you forgot." Her words hit me like a cold wind. "What do you mean?" She looked down at her hands, pale against the dark fabric of the blanket. "After she died, you stopped sleeping. You'd wake up crying, calling her name. You started drawing her face on the walls. Every time I tried to paint over it, you'd draw it again." My throat tightened. "I did that." She nodded. "You were breaking apart. The doctor said you might never move past it if we didn't help you forget. So we did what we could." I felt the weight of her words settle like stones in my chest. "You made me forget my own sister." Tears gathered in her eyes. "We didn't know what else to do. We told you she was just a dream, that the nursery was always empty. And you believed us." I leaned back, trying to breathe. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "And all those years you kept that room the same. It wasn't for her," she said softly. "It was for you, because some part of you still went in there. Even after we told you not to, you'd sit by the crib and hum to the air like someone was listening. I couldn't bring myself to stop you." Her voice broke on the last word. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "Why didn't you ever tell me the truth when I got older? Because by then, you were the only one holding us together." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing the person I'd become, and the child I once was all at once. "Your father couldn't bear to come home after what happened. Paul blamed himself for leaving you alone that night. Claire, she was too little to remember. You were the only one who stayed. The only one who still came back. If you'd remembered everything, you would have left. And I couldn't lose another child." The confession left her trembling. For a long moment, I couldn't find words. Then quietly I said, "You didn't lose her because of me, Mom. You lost her because you couldn't let her go." She looked away, tears catching in the corner of her eyes. "Maybe." I stood, moving to the window. Outside, the snow had almost melted, leaving streaks of wet earth along the yard. The world looked washed out, bare, honest. When I turned back, she was watching me, a faint smile on her lips, the kind that looks more like sorrow than joy. "You remind me of her, you know," she said. "You always did." Something inside me softened then. The anger, the confusion, all of it blending into something quieter, almost tender. I walked over and took her hand. It was cold, but she didn't pull away. For the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like the sound of something being laid to rest. After a while, she closed her eyes, breathing slow and shallow. I stayed there until she fell asleep, her hand still in mine. Claire came back in eventually, her voice barely a whisper. "Is she okay?" "She will be," I said, in her own way. We sat together for a while, the house creaking softly around us. It felt different now, lighter, though still filled with memories that would never quite fade. After a while, Claire spoke. "You remember everything now." "Enough." She nodded slowly. "You know, I think she always hoped you would. Not to hurt you, but so you could stop carrying it without knowing why." I looked toward the hallway, toward the stairs that led up to the nursery. "It's time we close that room," I said. Claire hesitated. You sure? Yes. Together we went upstairs. The air was still cool, the smell of dust and old wood filling the narrow hallway. When we reached the nursery door, I hesitated, then pushed it open. The light slanted through the window, catching the faint chalk outline of that small handprint. It looked softer now, almost like a shadow. Claire stepped beside me. It's strange, she whispered. I don't remember her, but I feel like I should. You were little, I said, but you remember the quiet after. She nodded. I think we all do. We didn't say anything more, just stood there, letting the air settle around us. Then Claire took a breath and began pulling down the old wallpaper. I joined her, our hands working in silence. The paper came off in long strips, revealing the plain white wall underneath. The words, the ones I'd seen before, were gone. Or maybe they'd never really been there the way I thought. When it was done, we stepped back. The room looked bare, but not empty. I'll help Mom repaint it, Claire said quietly. Something simple, something new. I nodded. Good. As we left the room, I paused by the doorway. For a moment, I thought I heard something. Not a voice, not even a sound. Just a feeling. The kind you get when someone finally stops whispering your name. That night, I stayed in the guest room. I didn't dream. In the morning, the house felt different. Warmer, brighter somehow. My mother was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea. She smiled when she saw me. You're still here. I promised I'd stay, I said. She laughed softly, with a real laugh. Small and tired, but genuine. You always were true to your word. We didn't talk about Eleanor again. We didn't need to. Some truths, once spoken, settle quietly where they belong. When I left later that day, the sky was clear, the road dry. As I drove away, I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired but lighter, as if something that had been coiled inside me for years had finally unwound. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from that house. I was just leaving it behind. I thought about all the holidays I'd spent alone in the background, thinking I was invisible. I realized now that I hadn't been invisible. I'd been holding up something fragile, something none of them could face. And maybe that was its own kind of love. A painful one, but real. As the town disappeared behind me, I rolled down the window. The cold air rushed in, crisp and sharp. It didn't hurt. It felt clean. Somewhere I thought, there's a version of her, of Eleanor, who never left. Not haunting us, not waiting, just part of the quiet now. And maybe that's what staying really means. Not holding on forever, but remembering long enough to let go. A year later, I drove back one last time. The house looked smaller than I remembered, almost tender against the pale light of spring. The windows were open, curtains moving gently in the breeze. I could hear laughter inside, Claire's kids, their voices spilling into the yard. It didn't hurt this time. It just sounded like life continuing the way it was meant to. My mother's chair sat empty on the porch, her old blanket folded neatly across the armrest. Claire told me she'd passed quietly in her sleep a few months back, her hands folded, her face peaceful. She'd been holding a photograph, all of us together, even me, even Eleanor. Inside, the walls were freshly painted a soft cream. The nursery was no longer a nursery, it was a study now filled with sunlight and books. There was no trace of the wallpaper, no shadow of a handprint, no whispers from the past, only stillness, the kind that feels earned. Before leaving, I found a letter in the desk drawer addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. You were never their convenience, it said. You were the one who stayed. And sometimes, the ones who stay are the ones who save us. When I stepped outside, I felt the wind shift through the trees, gentle, almost grateful. I smiled, finally understanding that love doesn't always look like warmth or fairness. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like being the one who remembers. As I walked down the driveway, I wondered, how many of us carry ghosts that aren't really ghosts at all? Just echoes of love we were never taught to name? How many memories do we bury to protect the people who hurt us? And how many truths do we forget just to survive? And when the silence finally lifts, what part of us is left? The one who stayed or the one who finally lets go?